A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
My Weird Prompts is a community-driven initiative exploring how AI can fuel curiosity and uncover the fascinating ways our world works. GPU compute for this podcast is generously provided by Modal. Learn more at modal.com.
I was looking at some census data the other day, and it struck me how much a city can change while still feeling, on the surface, like the same ancient place. We are talking about Jerusalem today. Daniel's prompt, this time, covers the massive demographic shifts happening in the city. Specifically, this idea of the secular flight toward the coast, and what it means for the future of the capital.
It is a heavy topic, Corn. I am Herman Poppleberry, by the way, for anyone joining us for the first time. I have been digging through the latest reports from the Jerusalem Institute and the Taub Center, and the numbers are staggering. We often talk about Jerusalem in these eternal, unchanging terms because of the history, but demographically, the city is in the middle of a total transformation.
It feels like everyone has a theory about it. You hear people in Tel Aviv talk about Jerusalem as if it is becoming a different country entirely. But before we get into the friction, we should probably ground this in the actual numbers. Jerusalem hit a pretty significant milestone recently, didn't it?
It did. In 2024, Jerusalem officially crossed the 1 million resident mark. That makes it by far the largest city in Israel. For context, the city's population at the end of 2023 was roughly 966,000, so we are looking at a massive, dense urban center. But the real story is not the total number, it is who those million people are. As of the most recent granular data, the city is about 60.5% Jewish and other, and about 39.5% Arab.
And that Jewish majority is not a monolith. That is where the secular flight conversation usually starts. People use the word secular, but in Israel, and especially in Jerusalem, that spectrum of religious observance is much more nuanced than just religious versus non-religious.
You have to look at the four-tier classification the Central Bureau of Statistics uses. You have the Haredim, or ultra-Orthodox, who are the most strictly observant. They are the ones you see in the black suits and hats living in neighborhoods like Mea Shearim. Then you have the Datiim, the national religious or modern Orthodox. They are fully observant of Jewish law, but are generally very integrated into the military and the workforce. They wear the knitted kippah. Then there is the Masorti category, meaning traditional. These are people who might keep a kosher home or have Shabbat dinner but do not necessarily follow every stricture. They might drive to the beach on Saturday after going to synagogue in the morning. And finally, the Hilonim, the secular Jews who are largely non-observant.
In Jerusalem, that Hiloni group is the one everyone says is packing their bags. And if you look at the raw count of Muslims in the city, it is the highest of any Israeli city at about 386,000. That is nearly 37% of the total population. But there is a massive spatial inequality there that we need to address right at the top.
Palestinian Arabs make up about 37% of the municipal population, but they live on only 13% of the municipal land. When you look at the budget, the disparity is even sharper. Only about 10% of the municipal budget is allocated to Palestinian neighborhoods, despite them making up over a third of the residents. That creates a pressure cooker environment. You have extreme density, crumbling infrastructure, and a lack of basic services in the east, while the west sees massive development.
So you have this tension between the East and West, but then within the Jewish West, you have this internal struggle. The Christian population is actually quite small now, right?
Very small. Only about 2%, or around 11,000 people, mostly in East Jerusalem. What is fascinating is that only about 9,000 people in the entire city of 1 million claim no religious affiliation at all. Jerusalem is a city where almost everyone identifies with a faith tradition. It is an exceptionally religious place compared to almost anywhere else in the developed world. Even the secular people in Jerusalem are often more religious in their daily habits than secular people in Tel Aviv.
So if everyone is religious, why are we hearing so much about this secular exodus? Is it just a vibes-based complaint from people who miss the old cafes in Rehavia? Or is there hard data showing that the middle is actually disappearing?
The data from 2016 was the first real alarm bell. In that year alone, the city saw a net loss of over 6,700 people in what we call reverse residential migration. That was 17,000 less observant people moving out, while only about 10,000 religious people moved in. That trend has not stopped, it has accelerated. By 2025, we started seeing headlines like the one in Vinnews claiming Jerusalem is now majority Haredi within the Jewish population.
That is a massive shift. If the Haredi community is the primary growth engine, that changes everything from municipal taxes to which shops stay open on Saturdays. Why is that specific group growing so much faster than everyone else?
It is pure math, corn. The annual growth rate for the Haredi population is about 4%. That is the fastest growth rate of any population in the developed world. To put that in perspective, about 60% of the Haredi population in Israel is under the age of 20. Compare that to 31% for the general population. They have larger families, they marry younger, and they stay in their communities. Jerusalem currently hosts about a quarter of all the Haredim in Israel.
I can see how that creates a feedback loop. As a neighborhood becomes more Haredi, the municipal services start to reflect that. Maybe there are more ritual baths and fewer community centers with mixed-gender swimming. If you are a secular family in a place like Katamon or Rehavia, you start to feel like the city is not being built for you anymore.
And it is not just a feeling. Let's look at the neighborhood of Rehavia. Historically, this was the bastion of the secular, German-Jewish intellectual elite. It was where the professors and the politicians lived. Over the last decade, the character has shifted dramatically. You see more and more apartments being bought by wealthy religious families from abroad who only visit for the holidays, or by Haredi families who are moving in as the older secular generation passes away. The local supermarket stops carrying non-kosher items. The neighborhood part becomes gender segregated during certain hours.
And then there is the economic factor. If you are a young, educated, secular professional, you are looking at Tel Aviv wages versus Jerusalem housing prices. Jerusalem is one of the poorest cities in Israel because such a large percentage of its population, both Haredi and Arab, is not fully integrated into the high-tech workforce.
That is the push factor that people often overlook. It is not just that people are being driven out by religion, they are being priced out by an economy that doesn't serve them. Jerusalem has relatively low wages compared to the high-tech hubs in the center of the country. If you are paying top-tier rent but living in a city that is increasingly geared toward a population that, for religious reasons, does not participate in the workforce at the same rate, the tax burden on that shrinking secular middle becomes very heavy. You are essentially subsidizing a lifestyle you don't share in a city where you can't afford a 3-bedroom apartment.
You mentioned earlier that this is not just a Jerusalem problem anymore. We are seeing a broader trend of emigration from Israel entirely in the last year or two. How does the Jerusalem flight connect to what is happening on a national level?
It is a nested problem. In 2025, we saw about 70,000 Israelis leave the country for extended stays, while only 19,000 returned. The demographic leaving the country is almost identical to the demographic leaving Jerusalem for Tel Aviv. They are young, they are secular, and they are highly educated. They are the mobile workforce. In 2024, Tel Aviv accounted for 14% of all Israeli departures. Jerusalem accounted for 6.3%.
I remember seeing a survey where 60% of young secular Israelis said they would consider leaving the country. Among high-income earners with foreign passports, that number hit 80%. If Jerusalem is the canary in the coal mine, it suggests that once the cultural and economic balance tips past a certain point, the people who have the means to leave will simply go.
If you feel like the national government is prioritizing the needs of the Haredi sector, which is what we see in the municipal budget of Jerusalem, and you have a European or American passport, the Tel Aviv option starts to look like a temporary stop on the way to the Berlin or New York option. The secular flight from Jerusalem is the first stage of a larger brain drain.
Let's talk about the old city for a second, because that is what most people picture when they think of Jerusalem. It is less than 1 square kilometer. How many people actually live inside those walls?
It is a tiny fraction of the city, only a few tens of thousands of people. The Muslim quarter is the largest and most populous, but the old city holds this massive symbolic weight. Even though it is a demographic outlier, what happens there often dictates the political temperature of the entire region. It is where the friction is most visible, but the real demographic war is being fought in the suburbs and the newer neighborhoods, like Ramat, Gilo, or Har Homa.
Those are the ring neighborhoods, and those have seen a huge shift toward the Haredi sector as well, right?
Yes, neighborhoods that were built in the 70s and 80s for secular and national religious families are now becoming Haredi strongholds. When a neighborhood tips, it happens fast. It starts with a few families, then a kindergarten, then a synagogue, and suddenly the secular families feel like they are the ones who are out of place. They worry about their kids' education and whether their lifestyle will be respected.
Is there any evidence that the Aliyah, the immigration of Jews from abroad, is offsetting this secular loss? We have seen a lot of talk about people moving to Israel because of rising anti-Semitism in Europe and the United States.
That is the Aliyah paradox we have touched on before. Even with the Nevertheless plan and other initiatives to bring people in, the total numbers are not keeping pace with the internal shifts. Many of the people moving to Jerusalem from abroad are themselves religious. They are often coming from Orthodox communities in New York, New Jersey, or France. So while they bolster the Jewish majority, they do not necessarily bolster the secular or traditional middle that is currently exiting. They are adding to the religious side of the scale.
So the city is growing in total numbers, hitting that 1 million mark, but it is becoming more polarized. You have a growing Haredi population, a stable and growing Arab population, and a shrinking secular center. Herman, where does this lead? If the current trends hold for the next 20 years, what does the municipal map of Jerusalem look like?
The projections from the Israel Democracy Institute are pretty clear. They expect Haredim to reach 16% of the total national population by 2030 and 24% by 2048. In Jerusalem, that timeline is much faster. We are already at the tipping point where the Haredi community is the dominant political force in the city council.
Which means they get to decide where the new schools are built and how the budget is spent. If 37% of the people are only getting 10% of the budget, like we see in some of the Palestinian neighborhoods, that is a recipe for long-term instability. And if the secular Jews feel like their tax dollars are going toward a lifestyle they do not share, they keep moving to Tel Aviv.
It is a self-reinforcing cycle. To break it, you would need a massive investment in secular-friendly infrastructure, things like cultural centers that are open on Saturdays, better public transportation that isn't subject to religious pressure, and a serious attempt to integrate the Haredi population into the high-tech workforce at a much higher rate. There are programs trying to do this, but they are fighting against the sheer speed of the demographic growth.
It is also worth noting that the secular flight isn't always a move to Tel Aviv. Sometimes it is just a move to the outskirts, to places like Mavaseret Zion or even the settlements in the West Bank that offer a more suburban middle-class lifestyle. But the result for the city of Jerusalem is the same, a loss of that diverse, pluralistic middle.
The cultural friction is real. I was reading about the pressure on women's dress in certain neighborhoods and the debates over public advertising. When you have a city that is this religious, the definition of public space becomes a constant negotiation. For a secular person, a bus is just a way to get to work. For a Haredi person, that bus is an extension of their community standards. Those two worldviews are increasingly unable to occupy the same space.
It makes me wonder about the status of Jerusalem as a global capital. If it becomes a city that is functionally divided between 2 or 3 very different, very religious communities, can it still function as the administrative and cultural heart of a modern high-tech state?
That is the question of the decade. If the people who drive the economy are all living in a 30-mile radius of Tel Aviv because they find Jerusalem too restrictive or too expensive, then the capital becomes a symbolic site rather than a functional one. We are already seeing some government offices struggle to keep staff who do not want to commute to Jerusalem or live there.
And yet, people keep moving there. 1 million residents is a lot of people who clearly feel that the city offers something they cannot find anywhere else. There is a pull to Jerusalem that defies economic logic.
For the Haredi and Arab communities, the city is the center of their world. They are not looking for a high-tech hub, they are looking for a place where their traditions are the norm. In that sense, Jerusalem is becoming more of what it has always been, a city of deep, uncompromising faith. The secular period of the late 20th century might end up looking like a historical anomaly in the long view of Jerusalem's history.
That is a provocative way to look at it. Maybe the flight is just the city returning to its natural state. But for those of us who value a pluralistic Israel, it is a tough trend to watch. If you want to dive deeper into how the land itself is owned and managed, which plays a huge role in these housing costs, you should definitely check out episode 511, where we talked about the power of the various churches and their land holdings in the city.
That is a great one for context. It explains why it is so hard to build new housing in the center of the city. And if you want to understand the national picture of why the Aliyah numbers are not fixing the problem, episode 1247 on the Aliyah paradox is the place to go. It breaks down the demographics of who is actually moving to Israel right now.
So, for the people listening who want to keep an eye on this, what should they be looking for in the next year or two? Are there specific milestones or reports we should watch?
Keep an eye on the Taub Center's 2026 updates. They track the migration patterns very closely. Also, look at the municipal elections. If you see a shift in how the budget is allocated toward Palestinian neighborhoods or secular community centers, that would be a sign that the city is trying to fight the exodus. But if the status quo holds, the math says the flight will continue.
It is a fascinating, if somewhat sobering, look at a city we all care about. I think the takeaway is that demographics are not just numbers on a page. They are the physical reality of what a city feels like and who it belongs to. If you lose the middle, you lose the bridge between these very different worlds.
The city of a million people is a city of a million different stories. But right now, a few of those stories are becoming much louder than the rest. The question is whether there is still room for the quiet secular story in the middle of all that noise.
We will have to see if the city can find a way to keep its middle from disappearing entirely. Thanks for the deep dive on the data, Herman. I know you have been living in those reports for a week.
It is what I do. There is always more to find when you look at the second-order effects of these shifts.
Well, that is our look at the changing face of Jerusalem. Thanks as always to our producer, Hilbert Flumingtop, for keeping us on track.
And a big thanks to Modal for providing the GPU credits that power the research and generation of this show. We couldn't do these deep dives without that support.
This has been My Weird Prompts. If you're enjoying these explorations into the nuances of technology, culture, and history, please consider leaving us a review on your podcast app. It really does help other people find the show.
You can also find us at myweirdprompts.com for our full archive and all the ways to subscribe.
We will be back next time with another prompt from Daniel. Until then, I am Corn.
And I am Herman Poppleberry.
Take it easy.
Goodbye.
This episode was generated using Gemini Flash 3. Text-to-speech engine was Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, My Weird Prompts.